you said about adding in meta kind of plot details to amuse yourself. And you've said in previous interviews that kind of the characters were telling you they wanted to kind of interact and meet. And I
Yeah.
guess in terms of publication order, you've got a few of them showing up in Full Fathom 5, which is only the third book. So
Yeah.
I guess when in your writing process did that kind of start happening? Was that always from the beginning you knew that you wanted to get there, or were you sitting down to do something different and suddenly, I don't know, Kat or Teo popped up and said, hey, I want to go to Cavacana in this book?
So often the characters would insert themselves. We tell a story about I don't know. It's kind of complicated. It starts to sound very mystical in a way that I like distrust a bit. But sometimes the mystical language is the easiest shorthand for what's actually going on.
It's the bedrock of craft stories.
Yes,
jump in.
absolutely. It's all storytelling, right? The sort of like a character has a kind of momentum in the fictional space, and sometimes the character's momentum like obviously drives them on a collision course for a particular portion of the setting or story. Yeah, and some moments I'm reaching for someone to fill a particular role. And then I realized, it could be this person who we've seen somewhere before, or like somebody almost steps out of the shadows or onto the stage. It feels sometimes in these books and in my fiction generally, like I've got, a bunch of actors sort of milling around back there. And sometimes
backstage room.
Yeah, there is. There's like an in-house company kind of, and I feel like a lot of authors have that. You can start to see, who's cast as the same role in different novels by a particular author. But in the craft sequence, we've got, almost this cinematic universe kind of feeling.
I love that idea for it. That's great.
Yeah, and so when I was writing Full Fathom 5, to use your example, I knew that I had a sense of Cavacana, I had a sense of Kai, I had a sense of the sort of dynamics of pressure that were on the Cavacanese priesthood and the culture and the kind of interstitial role that they played between the worlds of craft and the worlds of high theology. Their sort of troubled moral position and their ways that they're sort of operating on themselves. And I knew that there was going to be, I had a sense there'd be some kind of like heist or intrusion or sort of troubling of that, but I didn't know who exactly. And I took many passes at a first draft of Full Fathom 5. That was probably the book, barring the second Craft Wars novel, that was probably the book in the sequence that I've had to restart.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, part of it was that I was writing it right after Three Parts Dead came out.
Okay.
Literally that month, I'd sort of planned. I didn't know what I was doing. I don't know that knowing what I was doing would have changed anything, right? But I was. I thought, well, okay, I'll leave my office job and publish my book, and then I'll write another book. And since I know that I write at about, so many 1,000 words in an hour, and I'll all of a sudden have 8-hour days to write, I'll be able to turn around a draft of the next book in 2 months. And
I love the logic of that.
yeah. It's very illogical logic. It doesn't pay much attention to a whole bunch of things. But I was a kid at the time. I was in my late 20s, and something like that felt really doable. And like obviously you can just expand.
Naturally.
Yeah, that's how it goes, right? And so I found myself on tour for Three Parts Dead, and writing 10,000 words of Full Fathom 5, or of the book that would become Full Fathom 5, and just finding myself in this kind of joyless place. Like I'd have characters and things would be happening on the page, but the book would feel like it was just massive and too massive to write, and also disconnected from anything that had real electricity to it, any real energy. And I'd write 10,000 words, throw them out, write 20,000 words, throw them out, right? And it took a couple of months to even get purchase on it at all. And after that, I started going very, very slowly. Yeah, I was reading Karen Tidbeck's, I met Karen Tidbeck at World Fantasy in that year, which would have been 2012. And I read their book, Yaganath. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's this sort of Scandinavian legendarium sort of creature. And there was something about the extreme care with which it was written. Very, very short fictional, like a universe in which it felt just okay to live with a page for days, weeks, not necessarily knowing what was going on. So, which felt very unnatural to me. I came out of, forum fic and like writing things on Usenet where I wanted to see what would happen next. I wanted to see people's responses to the next chapter that I might post. So very eagerly hammering things down, kind of to see what would happen in this very mosaic sort of way, as if there's plaster that's drying, not mosaic, a fresco, like if there's plaster that's drying and I need to get the pigment into it, or else that's it, or else it's dried and the fresco is half complete. So I went back to Full Fathom 5 with that energy. I'll write as slow as I possibly can. I'll do this at like Tai Chi speed. And at first that was a couple hundred words a day sometimes. And it felt awful for me. And pretty quickly I got up to speed, and then, the book took over. But that was very much a case of having thrown out most of my ideas for what the structure would be and who many of the characters would be. It was like figuring out who Kai was and where she was, and figuring out who her friends and connections were and what her emotional situation was. And then like Teo showed up and Kat showed up, and it was great. It was like, oh, cool. I recognize you. But that had always been part of the design for the sequence. I wrote Two Serpents Rise before Three Parts Dead came out.
Okay.
And that book also had pretty substantial revisions. I was sort of, Three Parts Dead I'd written in the lead up, in sort of the great financial crisis, and then in the US, Borders Books evaporated, which caused a great deal of difficulty on the publishing side. So I didn't realize it at the time, but I was trying to look for an agent and a publisher. One of the hardest spans of the business, at least in the last 20 years or so. So while I was shopping Three Parts Dead around, and people were like, this is really strange. We love it.
Surprised this, not sure about it.
But it's strange. And I thought, well, okay, I'll write another book that's set in this world that's more or less unconnected that could also serve as an onboard. And in early drafts of that, I had a more sort of visible relationship between Caleb and Elaine Kavarian, who like shows up in Last First Snow. She visits, and they have this visit.
So interesting. That was one of my questions to ask about stuff like that. That's so interesting.
Yeah. Okay. And so it's still there. Like there's a reference to like his bridge partner in Two Serpents Rise, which is Elaine.
Obsessed.
So that part, like that sort of subplot, because it wasn't really doing anything but building character, ended up being one of the things I moved around and shifted out of the draft in revisions. But the structure was there, and it all made logical sense. So I saw no reason to like remove it from my own continuity in my head. Absolutely. So there's a lot of infrastructure like that. And it's that as much as anything else that I mean is like details and meta plot accumulating in. I'm like, oh, those two things are obviously connected, and this is going on over here. So if this, then probably like some number of years in the future, that's going to happen. And it started to feel like I was building. I don't know if you guys had the game Mousetrap.
Yeah.
But I was building one of those sort of elaborate Rube Goldberg contraptions, and never pushing the go button on it.
It will go. It will if you ever did press the button, it would work, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And so I started thinking, well, let's press the button and see what happens.